Chapter 7. A monstrous thing to be hidden away in a locked room. It was afternoon when he woke up. His servant had come several times into the room to see if he was up. Finally his bell sounded, and the servant came in with a cup of tea and a pile of letters. "Monsieur has well slept this morning," he said, smiling. "What time is it, Victor?" asked Dorian Gray. 1 hour and a quarter, monsieur." How late it was! He sat up and turned over his letters. One of them was from Lord Henry. He didn't open it. After about 10 minutes, he got up and went to the bathroom. The cool water refreshed him after his long sleep. He seemed to have forgotten all that he had gone through. As soon as he was dressed, he went into the library and sat down to a light French breakfast that had been laid out for him on a small round table close to the open window. It was a lovely day. A bee flew in and buzzed round the blue dragon vase, filled with yellow roses. He felt perfectly happy. Suddenly his eye fell on the screen that he had placed in front of the portrait, and he started. "Too cold for monsieur?" asked his servant, putting an omelette on the table. "Shall I shut the window?" Dorian shook his head. "I am not cold," he answered. Was it all true? Had the portrait really changed? Or was it his own imagination that made him see a look of evil where there was a look of joy? Surely a picture could not change. The thing was absurd. It would serve as a tale to tell Basil some day. It would make him smile. But he could remember it clearly. First in the dark, then in the bright sunshine, he saw that touch of cruelty round his lips. He was afraid of the moment when he could have a look at the portrait again. He was afraid of certainty. When the coffee and cigarettes were brought and the man turned to go, he felt a wild desire to tell him to stay. As the door was closing behind him, he called him back. The man stood waiting for his orders. Dorian looked at him for a moment. "I am not at home to anyone, Victor," he said at last. The man left the room. Then Dorian rose from the table, lit a cigarette, and lay down on a sofa that stood facing the screen. Should he move it aside after all? Why not let it stay there? What was the use of knowing? If the thing was true, it was terrible. If it was not true, why trouble about it? But what if somebody saw the horrible change? What should he do if Basil Hallward came and asked to look at his own picture? Basil would be sure to do that. No, the thing had to be examined, and at once. Anything would be better than this doubt. He got up and locked both doors. At least he would be alone when he looked upon the mask of his shame. Then he drew the screen aside and saw himself face to face. It was perfectly true. The portrait had changed. As he often remembered afterwards, and always with no small wonder, he found himself at first looking at the portrait with a feeling of almost scientific interest. Then he felt afraid, and going back to the sofa, lay there, looking at the picture in sickened horror. One thing, however, he felt that it had done for him. It had made him conscious how unjust, how cruel he had been to Sybil Vane. It was not too late to make reparation for that. She could still be his wife. His unreal and selfish love would be transformed into some nobler passion, and the portrait that Basil Hallward had painted of him would be a guide to him through life. 3 o'clock struck, and 4, but Dorian Gray did not move. He did not know what to do or what to think. Finally, he went over to the table and wrote a letter to the girl he had loved, asking for her forgiveness and accusing himself of madness. He covered page after page with wild words of sorrow and wilder words of pain. When Dorian had finished the letter, he felt that he had been forgiven. Suddenly there came a knock at the door, and he heard Lord Henry's voice outside. "My dear boy, I must see you. Let me in at once. I can't bear your shutting yourself up like this." He made no answer at first, but remained quite still. The knocking still continued, and grew louder. Yes, it was better to let Lord Henry in, and to explain to him the new life he was going to lead, to quarrel with him if it became necessary to quarrel. He jumped up, drew the screen across the picture, and unlocked the door. "I am so sorry for it all, Dorian," said Lord Henry, as he entered. "But you must not think too much about it." "Do you mean Sybil Vane?" asked the lad. "Yes, of course," answered Lord Henry, slowly pulling off his yellow gloves. "It is dreadful, but it was not your fault. Tell me, did you go behind and see her after the play was over?" "Yes." "I felt sure you had. Did you make a scene with her?" "I was rude, Harry, but it is all right now. I'm not sorry for anything that has happened. It has taught me to know myself better." "Ah, Dorian, I am so glad you take it in that way." "I am perfectly happy now. I know what conscience is, to begin with. I want to be good. I can't bear the idea of my soul being ugly." "A very charming artistic basis for ethics, Dorian. I congratulate you on it. But how are you going to begin?" "By marrying Sybil Vane." "Marrying Sybil Vane?" cried Lord Henry, standing up. "But my dear Dorian—" "Yes, Harry, I know what you are going to say. Something dreadful about marriage. Don't say it. Don't ever say things of that kind to me again. 2 days ago I asked Sybil to marry me. I am not going to break my word to her. She is to be my wife." "Your wife? Dorian, didn't you get my letter? I wrote to you this morning and sent it by my man." "Your letter? Oh, yes, I remember. I have not read it yet, Harry. I was afraid there might be something in it that I wouldn't like." "You know nothing, then." "What do you mean?" Lord Henry walked across the room, and sitting down by Dorian Gray, took both his hands in his own. "Dorian," he said, "my letter, don't be frightened, was to tell you that Sybil Vane is dead." A cry of pain broke from the lad's lips, and he jumped to his feet, tearing his hands away from Lord Henry. "Dead? Sybil dead? It is not true. It is a horrible lie. How can you say it?" "It is quite true, Dorian," said Lord Henry. "It is in all the morning papers. I wrote down to you to ask you not to see anyone till I came. You must not be mixed up in it. I suppose they don't know your name at the theater. If they don't, it is all right. Did anyone see you going round to her room? That is very important." Dorian did not answer for a few moments. "Did Sybil— Oh, Harry, I can't bear it. But be quick. Tell me everything at once." "I am sure it was not an accident, Dorian. When she was leaving the theater with her mother, about 12:30 or so, she said she had forgotten something upstairs. They waited some time for her, but she did not come down again. Then they found her lying dead on the floor of her dressing room. She had taken something by mistake, some dreadful thing they use at theaters. I don't know what it was, but I think it was prussic acid, because in a moment she was dead. "Harry, Harry, it is terrible," cried the lad. "Yes, it is very tragic, of course, but you must not get yourself mixed up in it. She looked such a child, and seemed to know so little about acting. Dorian, you mustn't let this thing get on your nerves. You must come and dine with me, and afterwards we will look in at the opera." "So I have murdered Sybil Vane," said Dorian Gray, half to himself. "Yet the roses are not less lovely for all that. The birds sing just as happily in my garden. And tonight I will dine with you, and then go on to the opera. How dramatic life is! If I had read all this in a book, Harry, I think I would have cried over it. Somehow, now that it has happened actually, and to me, it seems far too wonderful for tears. Here is the first love letter I have ever written in my life. Strange that my first love letter is addressed to a dead girl. Can they feel, I wonder, those white silent people we call the dead? Sybil, can she feel, or know, or listen? Oh, Harry, how I loved her once! It seems years ago to me now. She was everything to me. Then came that dreadful night when she played so badly, and my heart almost broke. She explained it all to me. It was terribly pathetic, but I was not moved. Suddenly something happened that made me afraid. I can't tell you what it was, but it was terrible. I said I would go back to her. I felt I had done wrong. And now she is dead. My God! My God, Harry, what shall I do? You don't know the danger I am in, and there is nothing to keep me straight. She would have done that for me. She had no right to kill herself. It was selfish of her. My dear Dorian, answered Lord Henry, taking a cigarette, if you had married this girl, you would have been unhappy. Of course you would have treated her kindly. One can always be kind to people about whom one cares nothing. But she would soon find out that you were absolutely indifferent to her. I think I would, said the lad, walking up and down the room, and looking horribly pale. But I thought it was my duty. It is not my fault that this terrible tragedy has prevented it. Harry, why is it that I cannot feel this tragedy as much as I want to? I don't think I am heartless. I am nothing of the kind. I know I am not. And yet this tragedy does not affect me as it should. It seems to me to be a wonderful ending to a wonderful play. It has all the terrible beauty of a Greek tragedy, a tragedy in which I took a great part, but by which I have not been wounded.